So on the previous video, we explained that on the top half of the homework, we're going to be practicing the quadratic formula. On the bottom half of the homework, we're going to be working just with the discriminant to say if we have one answer, two answers, or no answers. So let's jump to number 2 right here. You're going to have to write really tiny, but you need the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2 times a. And when you use this quadratic formula, you should rewrite the whole formula with parentheses to plug in your values. So everybody should write that right there with parentheses instead of the letters. And then identify your a, b, and c values. Your a value is 1, your b value is 8, your c value is 7. Plug in your b value there and there. Plug in your a value of 1 right there and there. Plug in your c value of 7 right there. And of course, when we start working this formula out, begin with the discriminant value, the value inside the square root. So when we go 8 squared, that's really a 64. And then we have 4 times 1, which is 4, times 7, which is 28. So it's minus 28, or you could have thought of it as negative 4 times 7, which is negative 28. Either way, you need to write a minus 28 right there as your discriminant value. We still have the plus or minus in front of the square root. We still have the negative b. But you know what? Let's do this instead. Let's completely simplify the discriminant value first before we rewrite everything else. 64 take away 28. What's that? That's 36, correct? So we really have, let me now do the whole thing. We have the negative 8. Let me write that. Negative 8. We have plus or minus. The square root of the discriminant is 36. All divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So this right here is close to one of the final steps. Since we do have a nice, beautiful 36, which is a perfect square number in there, we could actually square root the 36. We're going to end up with negative 8 plus or minus 6 divided by 2. And the plus or minus really provides us two answers. You have the negative 8 plus 6 divided by 2, and you also have the negative 8 minus 6 divided by 2. So on the top one, we're going to get negative 8 plus 6, that's negative 2 divided by 2, which that means that the answer is negative 1. And on the bottom one, we get negative 8 minus 6, that's negative 14 divided by 2. That answer is going to give us a negative 7. Those are your two answers, a negative 1 and a negative 7. If you were to have graphed this quadratic trinomial equation by finding the vertex, negative b over 2 times a, and then plugging in that value to find your y value of your vertex, and then graph it with the pattern 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9, or with the xy table, you will see that this parabola that opens up crosses the x-axis at negative 1 and at negative 7. Let's jump to number 3 here. Actually, might as well do the even questions on this video. We'll do the odd ones on the next one. So right here, we want to use the quadratic formula. Once again, that is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So the b value is negative 6, the a value is 1, the c value is 7. The b value of negative 6 goes right there and right here. The a value of 1 goes right here and right here. And the c value of 7 is that last one right there. Again, working on the discriminant, negative 6 in parentheses squared, that's really a positive 36. So inside my root, I have positive 36. Yes. And then I have 4 times 1 times 7, that's 28, right? So I really have minus 28. So this is my discriminant value, but we might as well simplify it. What's 36 take away 28?
Negative 2.
And of course, you could use a calculator for the inside part. So on the inside of the square root, we really have an 8. And let's rewrite everything else. The plus or minus in front of the square root. And also the minus minus out here changes the plus plus. So you really do have a positive 6 out in front of the square root divided by 2 times 1 right here on the bottom is 2. So ladies and gentlemen, the square root of 8 is not a nice number, but we could simplify the square root of 8. So let's do this on the side. The square root of 8, that's not a perfect square number, but we could rewrite it as a perfect square number, 4 times 2. That way, when we split the root, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 2 is going to stay the square root of 2. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So this right here is just to rewrite the square root of 8 as 2 square root of 2. So let's do that. I'm going to rewrite the whole thing, 6 plus minus, but instead of the square root of 8, I'm going to write 2 square root of 2, and it is all still divided by 2. Now, obviously, we're not going to get two nice answers, right? We're not going to get two nice answers. Why? Because that was not a perfect square number. If this was 9, well, yeah, you'd have a plus or minus 3, and you could go 6 plus 3. You could do 6 minus 3. You get two nice, beautiful answers. Right here, it's not a perfect square number, so you're not going to get nice answers, but they are answers. They are real answers. At this point, all you have to do is simplify the fraction, reduce the fraction. Now, in order to understand how to reduce this fraction, let's just do a little side note here. Everybody, watch this. If I were to take 2 plus 4 and divide it by 2, what would my answer be? Compared to 2 times 4 divided by 2. On one of these, I could cancel the 2 with the 2. But on the other one, I cannot cancel the 2 with the 2. All right, now this is totally off topic, but you need to know this, right? So right here, you cannot cancel the 2 with the 2 and say that the answer is 4. Because 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is not 4. Does that make sense? Over here, you could cancel 2 and 2 because of the multiplication. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 divided by 2 really is 4. So right here, you could cancel. So whenever you have a plus or a minus, you cannot cancel things out unless you cancel all 3 terms. You reduce all 3 terms at the same time. In other words, the 2, the 4, and the 2, you could reduce all of those by 2. If you reduce by 2, reduce by 2, reduce by 2, you'll get a 1 plus 2 divided by 1. And right there, that really will give you a 3 over 1, which is just 3, right? So let's forget about this guy right here. But the original problem, 2 plus 4, that is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So you could cancel as long as you do it to all of them. You could reduce as long as you do it to all of them. So why am I teaching that? Because if you go back to this answer, we have a 6, a 2, and a 2. You cannot cancel the 2's. Why not? Because there's a plus or minus. But you could reduce all 3 of them by 2. Does that make sense? So I could say I'm going to reduce the 6 by 2 and get a 3, reduce the 2 by 2 and get a 1, reduce the 2 by 2 and get a 1. So there's my new simplified answer. What's that new simplified answer? 3 plus or minus 1 square root of 2, but you don't have to write the 1, you just write the square root of 2. All divided by 1, and you don't need to write it divided by 1, because divided by 1 doesn't change anything. So ladies and gentlemen, this is your answer right there. Check the back of your worksheet. I know it's kind of challenging reducing, but that should be the answer in the back of your worksheet. The 3 plus or minus square root of 2. What you guys need to practice is getting from here down to here. As a matter of fact, on our notes, all right, so I was just informed that on the back they don't leave it like this. They actually write it as a decimal approximation. Right? So the square root of 2 is actually irrational decimal. And if you did take the 3 and add that 1.4 and subtract that 1.4 from the 3, you'll get the 1.4 and 1.6 that you get in the back. But this is a more approximate answer. And I'll tell you this right now. On the final exam, they're not going to write it as decimals. They're going to write it as 3 plus or minus square root of 2. Okay? So we need to be able to simplify. But what I was mentioning earlier is that at the end of our notes, there was actually some practice to this. Let me show you. So at the bottom right side of our notes, let me show you. On the bottom right side of our notes, where we had the discriminant explained, we had these practice problems, which is the final step of the quadratic formula, and simplifying. So this is just more practice. And in order to understand this from our notes, you have to really understand that, it moves to the side. You have to really understand that when you're adding when you're adding, the only way to cancel things out, you can't just cancel the 2 with the 2. The only way to cancel things out is if you cancel from all 3 of them. It's reducing from all 3 of them, right? Because 6 plus 2 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 is 4, not 6. If you cancel, the answer is not 6, the answer is 4. But if you were to reduce 2 on all of them, reduce by 2, reduce by 2, reduce by 2, you get a 1 plus 3 over 1, and 1 plus 3 is 4, which does work. 2 plus 6 is 8, 8 divided by 2 is 4. So if you're going to reduce, you have to reduce by all 3 terms. And on our class opener, or not our class opener, on our notes, we had these 3 problems to practice by. So if you want, turn to your notes right now and let's practice this first one right here. How could we reduce this first answer? If I was working on the quadratic formula, we could reduce all 3 terms by 2. So if you reduce by 2, you're going to get a 3. Reduce by 2, you're going to get a 2. Reduce by 2, you're going to get a 2. So your final answer will be negative 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 3 divided by 2. That's your final answer. That's the type of stuff you're going to see on the final exam as a multiple choice answer.
That's the final answer?
Yeah, that's the final answer right there. Now, on our homework, a lot of times we get perfect square numbers, which we are able to add and subtract those nice answers. But whenever you don't have a nice answer and you end up with something like this and you have 3 terms and they're all divisible by something, you reduce it. So let's look at another example from the notes today. Let's divide all 3 of those by what?
6.
By 6, right? So divide by 6, you get a 1. Divide by 6, you get a negative 2. Divide by 6, you get a 1. So our answer is, instead of negative 12, it's negative 2 plus or minus. You don't need a 1 in front of the square root of 3. Yeah, you just write square root of 3, all divided by 1, which means you don't need it divided by 1. So this is the answer right here. Yep.
Wow.
How about this one right here?
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Okay, let's move on to number 3. What could I reduce all these 3 terms by? What could I reduce all these 3 terms by?
2.
By 2, right? The 2 cancels, you get a 1. The 2 into 8 will give you a 4 with the negative in front. The 2 right there will give you 2 on the bottom. So your final answer will be negative 4 plus or minus square root of 3. You don't need the 1, all divided by 2. This is what you're going to see on the multiple choice on the final exam. So check this out, guys. The important part is when you use a quadratic formula, you might have it memorized, you might plug it in, you might even simplify the discriminant, and this is your answer. But on a multiple choice test, you're not going to find that answer. You have to reduce all 3 terms, the 8, the 2, and the 4. Reduce it all by 2, and this is what you're going to see as a final answer on your multiple choice test, which is kind of bad on the multiple choice because I could give you credit for this, but you're not going to be able to see, I'm not going to be able to do that on a multiple choice test. This is the only thing you're going to see as the correct answer on the multiple choice test. So anyways, that was some practice from our notes today. Let's go back to the homework here, and I hope we now understand how to reduce on the final step applying your quadratic formula. Let's jump to number 6, the next even question that we're doing. Now, here is a tip, some advice. Since this is an equation, even before identifying A, B, and C, you could look at your whole entire equation and say, everything's even. I want to divide everything by 2. Everything by 2. Why? Because you can. You can do anything you want to an equation as long as what you do to one side, do to the other side. So you will have x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Now normally if I were solving this equation, I would factor it, split it, and solve it. But because they want you to practice the quadratic formula, let's do the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a, where your a is 1, your b is 6, and your c is 5. Negativo b más menos raíz cuadrada de b cuadrado menos 4ac dividido por 2a. 6 for b, the a value is 1, the c value is 5, the a value is 1. Discriminant, 6 squared is 36, 4 times 1 is 4, times 5 is 20. So on the inside, I really have 36 minus 20. And of course, you could use a calculator on the final exam. 36 minus 20, should I write it? Nah, just right here. 36 minus 20. The 36 comes from here, the 20 comes from here. 36 minus 20 is 16. So on the inside, the discriminant is 16. Out in the front, you have the plus minus. You have the 2 on the bottom. You have a negative 6 out in the front. So what I really have is a negative 6 plus or minus 4, because the square root of 16 is 4, divided by 2. Now, because this was a perfect square number, we end up with a nice, beautiful 4 as an answer, which means that we could now get 2 nice, beautiful answers by doing adding 4 and subtracting 4. So, negative 6 plus 4 divided by 2 is going to give us one answer. Negative 6 minus 4 divided by 2 is going to give us another answer. Up on top, negative 6 plus 4, that's negative 2 divided by 2. The answer is negative 1. On the bottom, negative 6 minus 4, that's negative 10 divided by 2, that's negative 5. So we get 2 answers, negative 1 and positive 5, for this question number 6. Negative 1 and negative 5 are the answers for this question number 6, using the quadratic formula. It would have been a heck of a lot easier to factor, split, and solve, but because we're practicing the quadratic formula, I hope you guys do so as well. Now, in order to use the quadratic formula, you have to have your A, B, and your C value on one side set equal to 0. You can't just say A is 2, B is negative 5, and C is 12. That's incorrect. You first have to subtract 12, rewrite the whole thing, 2x squared minus 5x minus 12 equals 0. Now you could identify your A, your B, and your C values, and now you could use the quadratic formula, negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A, where the B value is negative 5, the A value is 2, and the C value is negative 12. So let's work on the discriminant first. When I do negative 5 squared, what do I get? I get 25. Negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. And then when I go 4 times 2, that's 8. Or how about this? Negative 4 times 2, that's negative 8. And negative 8 times negative 12 is a positive 96. So we end up with a positive 96. And that is the discriminant value. Yes. So what is that discriminant value? What is 25 plus 96? That's 121. So ladies and gentlemen, we really have a positive 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. Now that's a good thing, because the square root of 121 is what? 11. So I really have 5 plus or minus a nice beautiful 11 divided by 4, which means that I have the 5 plus 11 over 4, and I also have the 5 minus 11 over 4. So 5 plus 11, that's 16. 16 divided by 4 is the answer 4. 5 minus 11, that's negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 4 is a fraction, negative 3/2. That's your final answer when you reduce it. Yes. So those are your 2 answers for number 8. If you check the back, it should have those 2 answers, 4 and negative 1.5 or negative 3/2. But that's how you solve it using the quadratic formula. Man, this is a long video, huh? Number 10, you can't really do this until you set it equal to 0. So we're going to add 8x. We're going to add 8x. And you're going to have to rewrite the whole thing. 3x squared plus 8x minus 1 equals 0. Your A value is 3, your B value is 8, your C value is negative 1. Using the quadratic formula, negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. Always set it up this way. The B value is 8, plug in those B values of 8. The A value is 3, plug in the A values of 3 right there on those spots. And the C value is negative 1, plug that one into the very last parenthesis. Now let's work this out. Let's start with the discriminant. What is 8 squared? 64, right? And how about a negative 4 times 3, that's negative 12, and negative 12 times negative 1 is positive 12. So I really have a 64, the 8 squared 64 plus 12. This is our discriminant value that belongs inside the square root. So let's rewrite everything. We have a negative 8, we have a plus or minus, we have the square root of, what's 64 plus 12? 76, right? 76. And on the bottom, we still have the divided by 6. So this might be our answer. It might be our answer. The question is, could you simplify the square root of 76 to make this look nicer? Well, in order to simplify, you need a perfect square number. You need to rewrite 76 as multiplication, but of a perfect square number. So it's easier to do with the calculator. If you just take 76 and try to divide it by a perfect square number, that way you could rewrite it. So check this out. I want to do this right here on the side. The square root of 76. I did it on a calculator. 76 divided by 4 is 19. So I know 76 could be rewritten as 4 times 19. That way when I split the root, I will get 2 square root of 19 instead of the square root of 76. So let me rewrite this answer so far, but instead of square root of 76, I'm going to put 2 square root of 19 because that's what the square root of 76 is. You rewrite it as 2 square root of 19. And it is still all divided by 6. It's still all divided by 6. So the question is, could you do anything else here? Yes, you could reduce by 2. That's exactly right. So the 8 divided by 2 is 4, and it's negative. The 2 divided by 2 is going to be a 1. You don't have to write it. The 6 divided by 2 is a 3. So your final answer is negative 4 plus or minus 1 square root of 19, all divided by 3. Now, if you look at the back, they're not going to give you that answer. They're going to give you a decimal approximation, right? Because the square root of 19 is about 4.3 or 4.4, and they actually go through and add and subtract the 4.3, giving you different decimal answers. But this is what you're going to be seeing as an answer on the final exam.
Mr. S, this is a lot.
It is a lot.
I can't remember half of that.
All you have to do is remember your formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. If you got that down, you're good, because the calculator really does the rest. Where you plug in your a value of 1.6, your b value of 2, and your c value of 2.5. So 2's go right there, a's of 1.6 go right there, and the c value of 2.5 goes right there. And honestly, the calculator does everything else. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I did the discriminant value on the calculator. 2 squared in parentheses minus 4 parentheses 1.6, 2.5. I did that on the calculator, and I got negative 12. So what we have here is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 12 divided by 2 times 1.6, which is 3.2. But the bottom line is, if your discriminant value is negative, even if it were a nice number like negative 9 or negative 16, you cannot do the square root of a negative number, which means that number 12 has no solution, no real answers. Okay? So we've done 1 through 12, practicing the quadratic formula. I hope you guys do the odd ones, and we'll do a separate video.
Homework or all of them or just the odd ones?
Yeah, we want to do all of them for the homework.